What's up? So tonight we're going to be talking about we're going to take a look into the crisis of the American workforce, globalization. We're going to be talking there about the end of work and talking about a lot of people in America can't find jobs. Of course, they're bringing illegal immigrants over here. And There is a decline in the middle class. Of course, there's basically a lot of the future of the economic system that is in crisis right now. And so you have a lot of people on TikTok, talking about they can't find a job, even though they got a degree from a college. You see a lot of closures as well. You see banks closing. You see colleges shutting down. You see the lack of enthusiasm of going to four-year college because of the increase of debt that these kids said that they're going to take on. They don't want to. Man, there is a lot of problems. And of course, when you look at the manufacturing jobs, the end of work, America is in a decline. We got to talk about it today on the Lori Henderson podcast show. Like, share, and subscribe, and we're live. You look into the future, public sees America in decline on many fronts. They see basically the end of work, globalization, and the problem with the strategy from the white liberals who basically is trying to destroy the American middle class. And we also see that politicians in general don't have any kind of they don't have no kind of strategy, none. You see people on TikTok and people on Instagram, people online, Facebook or whatever, YouTube or whatever, talking about that they can't find work. They're online talking about that they don't know what to do because no jobs are basically calling them back. Okay. And I think that a lot of people that went to college, we basically have fallen for the okie doke that the Gen Xers basically were like, no, we're not falling for that trick. We see our brothers and sisters, they went to college and basically they're not finding the jobs that they need to. Okay. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Late night here on the Lori Henderson podcast show. Like, share, thumbs up. Thanks for joining us. Today we're looking into the future. America is in, is in a decline. Okay. The American worker is basically no longer needed in this country. The American worker basically by these corporations have been seen as being too spoiled. Okay. And so they're bringing in all of these illegal immigrants. They're making sure that the American workers say, look, they tell the American worker, look, if you do not settle for a meal job or a job basically where this is going to be the pay, then we'll just hire somebody else. Okay. And they're also basically getting back to us because remember, they did the Great Resignation back in 2020 or 2022, around that time, and they were upset with that. Okay. And so these major corporations and their CEOs and the shareholders and all of these people in the global society who is running the whole thing, they are upset with the American worker. Okay. They're upset with the worker is spoiled. Okay. For a very long time, there has been a huge, huge industrial revolution in the United States. And we'll be talking about that for a brief moment. I'm not going to bore you with a lot of that, okay, because our topic is to talk there about what the United States is heading to. And then with the so-called BRICS nations, Russia, China, and South Africa, and what's the other one? It's India, right? Four or five countries that basically are starting this BRICS nation where they're basically going to challenge the US dollar. Okay. That also has brought the West more challenging situations as well. The American workforce is in crisis. Okay. Pew Research Center brought this up a long time ago. They brought it up and did an article on March the 21st, 2019. And I quote here, I'll give basically credit to Kim Parker, Rich Morin, Julianne Messing, and Horsowitz. The title there is Looking to the Future. Public Sees America in Decline on Many Fronts. A majority predict a weaker economy, a growing income divide, a degraded environment, and a broken political system. You see that? In other words, because the society basically is saying, well, we're going to be losing a lot of people in the population, i.e., white folks. We're not going to have the same kind of economies that we had before. They're recognizing this, right? But the article starts out, and I quote, when Americans peer 30 years into the future, they see a country in decline economically, politically, and on the world stage. While a narrow majority of the public, 56%, say they are at least somewhat optimistic about America's future, hope gives way to doubt when the focus turns to specific issues. Now, here they go now. Specific issues there, okay? A new Pew Research Center survey focused on what Americans think the United States will be like in 2050 finds that majority of America foresees a country with a burgeoning national debt, a wider gap between the rich and the poor, and a workforce threatened by automation. Majority predicts that the economy will be weaker, healthcare will be less affordable, the conditions of the environment will be worse, and older Americans will have a harder time making ends meet than they do now. Also predicted a terrorist attack as bad as or worse than 9/11, sometimes over the next 30 years. Okay, so we already see the decline in the workforce. Okay, we see that basically major jobs are not only going overseas, but they are basically pushing American workers out, and they're only going to select those American workers that are willing to take certain types of wages. So if you are an American worker and you say, well, okay, I got a degree, I got this experience, I'm looking for something around $60,000, but the job may basically pay $45,000 or $50,000. That's an American worker that either going to have to decide is they're going to take a massive or a major $10,000 or $15,000 pay cut to have money coming in to pay their bills, or what the companies can do and what they have now been doing is to say, we're going to take the salary away from somebody making $100,000, and we're going to fire that person, and we can basically hire two people in the same particular situation. The article goes on to say that these grim predictions mirror, in part, the public's sore mood about the current state of the country. The share of Americans who are dissatisfied with the way things are going in the country, 7 to 10 January of 2019, is the higher now than any time in the past year. Now, that was just 4 years ago, 5 years ago, right? Now, just look at the view now when Joe Biden got in office and they start to bring these illegal immigrants over here. The view of the U.S. in 2050 that the public sees in its crystal ball includes major changes in the country's political leadership. Nearly 9 in 10 predict that a woman will be elected president. And roughly 2/3, 65%, say the same about a Hispanic person. And on a decidedly optimistic note, more than half expected a cure for Alzheimer's disease by 2050. The public also has somewhat more positive view, or at least more benign one, of some current demographic trends that will shape the country's future. The U.S. Census Bureau predicts that by 2050, Blacks, Hispanics, Asians, and other minorities will constitute a majority of the population. About 4 in 10 Americans, 42%, say this shift will be neither good nor bad for the country. While 35% believe a majority minority population will be a good thing, 20% say it would be bad. Now that's mostly white folks saying that. Okay. These views differ significantly by race and ethnicity. Whites are about twice as likely as Blacks or Hispanics to view this change negatively. Okay. 28% of white versus 13% of Blacks and 12% of Hispanics. And when asked about the consequences of an increasingly diverse America, nearly half of whites, 46%, but only a quarter of Hispanics and 80% of Blacks say a majority minority country would weaken American customs and values. Now, these are the old, these Negroes who agree with white society. Latinos, they're the same way, some of them as well. That's the one that is split in that number. The public views another projected change in the demographic contours of America more optimistically. Honestly. By 2050, people aged 65 and older are predicted to outnumber those younger than 18, a change that a 56% majority of all adults say will be bad for the country. Okay? In other words, the United States will have more and more older people than it will young folks. Okay? They're only talking mostly, of course, about the white society, where you have 25 states that are not producing enough children right now. Okay? In the face of these problems and threats, the majority of Americans have little confidence that the federal government and their elected officials are up to meeting the majority of challenges that lie ahead. More than 8 in 10 say they are worried about the way that the government in Washington works, including 49% who are very worried. A similar share worries about the ability of the political leaders to solve the nation's biggest problem, with 48% saying that they are very worried about this. And when asked what impact the federal government will have on finding solutions to the country's future problems, more say Washington will have a negative impact than a positive one, 55% versus 44%. Instead, large majority of Americans look to science and technology as a way as to the educational system to solve future problems. 87% say science and technology will have a very or somewhat positive impact in solving the nation's problems. And roughly 3/4 say the same about public K through 12 schools, 77% in colleges and universities, and 74%. Even so, roughly three quarters, 77%, worried about the ability of public schools to provide a quality education to tomorrow's students, and more expected the quality of these schools to get worse, not better. And by 2050, and only about a third, 34% of the country's rate increased spending on science research as a top policy priority. You see. Goes on to write that underlining many of these and other findings are deep divisions along the traditional fault lines of American life, including race, age, and education. However, among the more striking differences found in this survey are those between Republicans and Democrats. Taken together, the size of the frequency of these differences underscores the extent to which partisan polarization underpins not just the current political climate, but the views of the future as well. Okay, now here's the issue so far. Now we saw how America had worked. We stayed in this society as young people. We saw a lot of jobs being produced and early on. Especially out the industrial revolutions and all this stuff here. We'll talk about, like I said, in a minute. And the thing about this is that now we see a different phase. And these white folks are worried that because they're becoming a minority by the 2045, 2050, that they're now having a negative view about having Blacks and Hispanics, and mostly a lot of these political positions now. They're worried about this for the sake of how the society basically will have to then provide tangible benefits for minorities. Okay? It goes on to say here, across a range of issues, a difference between partisan is not merely apparent, but conspicuously large. Despite shared concern about the future quality of the nation's public schools, about 2/3 of Democrats and those who lean Democratic, 66%, but only about 36% of Republicans and Republican leaners rate increased spending on education as a top federal government priority. About 6 in 10 Democrats, 58%, but only 19% of the Republicans say the new media will have a positive impact on solving the country's future problems. About 4 in 10 Democrats, 42%, say a majority of non-white population will strengthen American customs and values, a view expressed by only 13% of Republicans. Mind you, that what these good white folks are saying is that they don't know what the future look like by the year 2045 and 2050 when they become a minority. And they recognize it has been what? Their media that has basically have been, helping to shape the American society and the way we know as far as what they describe their customs, values, and norms. They're believing now that because the population is becoming minority white, that white people basically may not have the type of influence that they did early on here. Okay? And this is something that has caused a crisis in the United States. Okay? And so now they basically is looking at their future with pessimism. Okay? Let's go on, and we'll basically be talking about what's going on and bring in the financial and the economic problems as well to tie everything into it. The article goes on to write, and I quote, about 7 in 10 Americans, 72% expect older adults will be less prepared financially for retirement in 2050 than they are today. And even largely shared, 83% predict that most people will have to work until their 70s and older to afford to retire. And the public forecast for the future of the Social Security system is decidedly grim. Among those who are not yet retired, 42% expect to receive no Social Security benefits when they leave the workforce, and another 42% anticipate that benefits will be reduced from what they are today. Adults younger than 50 are particularly doubtful that Social Security will be there when they leave the workforce. 48% expect to receive no Social Security benefits when they retire. By contrast, 28% of those who are 50 or older are similarly pessimistic. But even among this older group, only about a quarter, 23%, expected to receive Social Security benefits at a current level, at the current levels. These findings reflect a long-standing skepticism, particularly among young adults, about the long-term solvency of the Social Security system. Even as they doubt the long-term financial viability of the Social Security system, most Americans reject reduced benefits. Only a quarter believe that some reduction in benefits for the future retirees would need to be made to shore up the system finances, while about 3 times as many say benefits should not be reduced in any way. Then, few Americans predict a better standard of living for families by 2050. More than 4 in 10 Americans, 44%, predict that the average family standard of living will get worse rather than better over the next 30 years. That's roughly doubled the share, 20%, who expect families to fare better financially in the future than they do today. 35% predict no real change. When it comes to prospect for children, half of the public says children will have a worse standard of living in 30 years than they do today, while 42% predict that they will be better off. Men are more likely than women to say children's standard of living will be higher in 30 years than it is today, 47% versus 36%, while those who do not have children in the home are somewhat more pessimistic about this than those who do. 52% versus 44 says children will have a worse standard of living. Okay? So they're now thinking and talking about the fact that they basically don't know if their standard of living here is going to be worth having children in the future. And what would be the optimism of the economy at that time, as we see more jobs basically becoming are leaving the United States, more crisis in the workforce, more people basically cannot find a decent wage here, right? As we see it, will that get worse in the future? Okay, and of course we know we have a political election coming up in November the 5th. And people basically are very worried about what the outcome of this election will be. And it ties all back to what the future will hold for the what the United States is experiencing as well. Okay. Finally, I want to read an article before we talk more in depth into this. I want to talk about a section here that Pew Research did, where it says minorities are more optimistic than whites about the country's future. Okay. Okay. Number one, they're not going to be able to call us minorities anymore because they're going to be minorities as well, you see. And we talked about this on the Lawyers and Podcast show, where, of course, that the reduction of whites in this country, their numbers are dwindling. And they're not going to be a force that they were when they in the 1900s or what have you. there's a great decline of of white people in the United States, and of course, by this trend is going to begin by the year 2040, where you're going to see a reduction of white population, and this is already starting in 25 states. This is why they're bringing in illegal immigrants. But see, the reason why they're putting them where black people is because these illegal immigrants, just like other immigrants who comes to this country, have to basically get a leg up in this society, and typically they have to go where black people is to get that leg up. So they're bringing these illegal immigrants over here. But the reason why they're saying that certain minorities are basically optimistic is because these are mostly the people that the government has been helping over black people. So their little research here by the Pew Research is asking those Hispanics and Asians and other groups that basically is getting actual tangible benefits from the government, if you will, you see. But this article I want to go into before we get in deep into the conversation about the losing of jobs and the crisis of the American global economic system is very important. Why do minorities basically feel more optimistic than whites in the country? Well, white people believe, of course, as the beginning of the article, that because they're going to be a minority in the country by the year 2040 and 2045, that they basically, like I said, their influence also will decline not only in the United States, but perhaps in the world. Okay? And they're looking at their media, they're looking at the decline of their military, and they're looking at other things to see what they can do in order to maintain their influence. Okay? And basically, they don't know what to do as Black and Hispanics become the largest ethnic group in the next 20 years. Let's talk about it. Overall, 56% of all adults say they are either very optimistic, 12% are somewhat optimistic, 44% about the US in 2050. But more than 4 in 10, 44% see the country's future more darkly. Get that. Including 13% who say they are very pessimistic and 31% who are somewhat pessimistic about America in 30 years. Black and Hispanic adults are among the most optimistic about the country's future. 7 in 10 Blacks and 2/3 of Hispanics feel hopeful about America's future. In contrast, about half of all whites, 51%, are as confident. High school graduates and those with less education are also are somewhat more positive about the country's prospect. Or college graduates, 60% to 43%. Now, notice I said are as confident, okay, which means that the survey is not speaking for the majority of whites who still see that the country is on a pessimistic decline, and they also, like I said, their influence in the United States and parts of the world. So they're going to be more white people pessimistic about the future of America than there are minorities. Okay. And it goes on to say here that unlike the wide partisan differences seen elsewhere in this survey, Democrats and Republicans are about equally optimistic when it comes to these broad predictions about Americans' future. The racial pattern switches when Americans are asked about the future of race relations over the next 30 years. Slightly more than half of all whites, 54%, but 43% of Blacks and 45% of Hispanics say relations will get better. Overall, the country is divided on the future of race relations. About half, 51%, say they will improve, while 40% predict they will get worse. Okay? Now, this is going to be, it's a guessing game until we get there. Because, like I said, it's 20 years from now. Okay, we have a lot of people retiring. And in that age bracket where you got people who are 50 or 60 years now who is headed for retirement, majority of white Americans will be in that age range group. And this is what's causing the crisis here because the baby boomer generation among white people are retiring. And a lot of them, just like the old civil rights generation, are dying out. Now here come a different form of a new populace among the American society. And this is a population that, of course, the American system have not seen before, right? And so now is a different type of game that they are running out of. You know, the same game that they've been playing back in the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s and 90s. They recognize there's a problem with that. Okay. Can't basically fool these young folks. Okay. The young folks are on TikTok. The young folks will basically, they would go online now for any kind of reason right now. You know, if they manager tell them to do something on a job, for instance, they're online talking about it. You know, it's just a different type of atmosphere when we talk there about the American workforce and society. We also got people on TikTok and Instagram and other places, on YouTube and all that, talking about like they can't find jobs, right? In this global society. And we basically look at a different kind of economy in the United States because there's a global shift. And the Democrats, the white liberals, and the Jews basically are trying now to focus on Israel and making sure that Israel is straight. They have policies now, right now, which is why they want Kamala Harris to win, because she basically is married to a Jewish white man, and they want to continue to make sure that all of the people in Israel, all of the Jewish people, their plight is taken care of over the American worker, if that makes sense. And no, that's not anti-Semitic. What I'm saying to you is that they basically is saying that the American policy has to wait for the American people so that basically we can basically deal with Israel, with this crisis in, you know, them fighting the Palestinians and they fighting in Gaza, and Israel should be, you know, put on the, you know, the forefront. And we should also ship out jobs, bring illegal immigrants in to replace the American worker if they're not going to basically be satisfied with these wages. Man, it's a lot of stuff going on. And so when these Democrats took office, when Joe Biden took office, remember, he was financed, Joe Biden, just like Obama, was financed by George Soros. George Soros just announced that he has given most of all of his wealth to his son. Okay. And these are satanic Jews. I'm looking at the whole policy system, and they align themselves with white Democrats and liberals because they know the vast majority of Black people also align with the Democratic Party. So now that's the reason why they rely so heavily on the Democrats to basically to enact the policies of the Jewish community more over than trusting Republicans. And so that's what we're dealing with now. We're dealing with a global economic system. We're dealing with jobs being shipped overseas. We're dealing with the fact that the American worker is not going to be spoiled more. Okay, especially when these Democrats are in office. You see, Trump, he's a nationalist. He believes that you should put American workers first, which is why there's so much pushback in trying to reelect him again. Okay, they want Kamala Harris in because Kamala Harris is going to continue what Joe Biden has been doing along with Obama. And that is to put other people first and other European countries first and white Jewish policies in the plight first over the American worker, and specifically Black people as well, you see. And now with this election, black people say they're either going to set out or they're going to be voting Republican, because not only are we not getting good jobs, but the economic system is declining because all of these jobs are basically now paying low wages, and they're causing the companies to go out of business. Okay, and this was talked about in the early 1990s. Speaking of talking about the early 1990s, we basically have another global shift to talk about. We got banks that's closing down. We got businesses that's closing down. We have a lot of shipping in the American economic system right now. And if Kamala Harris get back in and take over, then this is going to continue. The American worker is going to decline. They're trying to destroy the middle class, right? And it's been talked about all over the internet how, like I said, that when you apply to about 500, I mean, some people say a number of 500 jobs or whatever. But, the average person who is trying to get a decent job is applying to that to other jobs, and they're not getting callbacks, and then they are still basically place the job online, and then they'll tell the American worker, hey, well, we've already filled that position. We already filled that position. That's because they're looking for a person that migrated over from the United States some 5 or 10 years ago. Okay, because now the American worker know the games they've been playing. And so when they have basically, you have to look at the three uh, reconstruction phases that we had in the United States. Remember, we had the first reconstruction in the 1870s. It was about keeping black people away from the economic system and destroying our communities in the 1870s and stuff, and to basically have black codes and all this stuff to keep us away from our economic potential. Okay, and to destroy the Freedmen's Bank that was set up for us as well, after the Civil War. So we had basically having to deal with that first phase of Reconstruction. The second phase came in kind of like when Obama took over. Remember, he signed an executive order for DACA workers, and then it came that they were bringing these illegal immigrants in as well. This produced the second phase of Reconstruction. And then, of course, when Jim Crow Joe got in, we have the third phase of Reconstruction. Now you set up the policies under Obama and to basically help to decline black wealth and not do anything for black people when he was there in office, while he's wagging his fingers at black men not voting for Kamala Harris. He was basically making sure that these illegal immigrants get settled to what was going to be the third phase of Reconstruction, which now you have Jim Crow Joe, and he's flooded the gates open with these illegal immigrants coming in, and they're giving them small increments in payments out of our reparations money. Okay, this is what you have to understand. And they're wanting to basically ignore black people by keeping us in a segmented labor market. And that's their goal. And now they are basically questioned as to how do they contain these black folks who are wanting an economic potential. You see here now that these good white folks are basically hiring these illegal immigrants in these factories so they can have enough time to basically build the robots and the machines that's going to take the place of the American worker in the near future, where then these companies and their CEOs will have one person, and basically the machine is doing all of the work. Okay. And then if you, of course, you go to Walmart, you go to Target, you go to all these people, all these places where you have kiosks, and notice that they have basically like one person watching about 7 self checkout registers, right? And they're getting rid of these cashiers, you see, no longer needing the American worker. Okay, they're replacing the American worker and basically pushing out the American worker. And because the American worker is they're saying that the American worker is too spoiled. The American worker want all of these benefits. The American worker don't want to work 5 days a week, okay? But these illegal immigrants have no problem with doing that. In addition, they also believe that they want to get more richer. And so the poor get more poor. And so they're destroying the middle class. If you, of course, notice, if you go to the grocery stores, hell, bread is almost $7 now. Eggs almost $5 or $6. Gas have went up. All of these things is not only because of the countries, the BRICS nation is also playing a part of it, but also in addition to that, is that they're basically just shutting the American worker out. Okay, because like I said, George Soros, who financed, Obama and Jim Crow Joe Biden, basically want to bring different type of workers in to replace the American worker, and this will help the CEOs of major companies basically get more richer and more richer. And they're squeezing it tight for the American worker to basically get any money so they can spend, okay, in these stores. And in other words, they're taking all your savings now. They're taking all of the money that you got in the bank. And so now what they're doing is they're reshuffling the deck, and they're looking very, very much at certain types of people who is willing to take a low wage. And then we talked there about having no more jobs. In fact, in a famous book written by Jeremy Riken called The End of Work, The Decline of the Global Labor Force and the Dawn of the Post-Market Era, Riken maintains that we are now in the throes of a third industrial revolution, which had been going on since the end of World War II. The first industrial revolution occurred in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, when steam power first became developed and used extensively and replaced human labor in mines of the factory. Next, the second industrial revolution in the late 19th, the first half of the 20th centuries, powered by fossil fuel of coal and oil replaced human labor as an accelerated pace in the workforce. In both the first and the second industrial revolutions, though, the economic niches and opportunities opened up by new forms of power offset the loss of jobs. However, Riken does not see this happening with the third industrial revolution, which he also calls the information age. In the past, when new technologies had replaced workers in a given sector, new sectors have always emerged to absorb the displaced laborers. Today, all three of the traditional sectors of the economy, agricultural, manufacturing, and service, are experiencing technology displacement, forcing millions onto unemployment rolls. The only new sector emerging in the knowledge sector, made up of all small elite of entrepreneurs, scientists, technicians, computer programmers, professional educators, and consultants. While this sector is growing, it is not expected to observe more than a fraction of the hundreds of millions who will be eliminated in the next several decades in the wake of the revolutionary advances in the information and communication science. See how Racken predicted that there will be an end of work and that the American worker will be replaced with machines and robots. This article goes on to say that a major problem with the situation, according to Racken, is that under the present system, this lack of employment means in terms that many households will lack the purchasing power and participate fully in society to buy the goods and the services produced by the economy. In a sense, he notes This is a reversal of Henry Ford's philosophy of paying his workers a sufficient wage so that they could afford the very cars that they were producing. Much of the book is detailed recitation of facts and figures from around the world, showing how employment in traditionally key sectors, agriculture, manufacturing, and the service sector, is dwindling and is unlikely to be replaced by new jobs. Ultimately, Riken sees no way to stop or reverse the trend of automation and technology development that are creating the end of work. He does, though, present some policy options for governments to consider to ease the transition and to deal with the future situation where there is not enough meaningful work for all. These include a shorter work week, suggests a 30-hour week, a guaranteed annual income coupled with a requirement for individuals to work for welfare, a revised tax system that will allow deductions for time spent in volunteering and charitable and non-for-profit organizations, and then term shadow wages. This later option he sees as a very attractive one, and suggests that this third sector could emerge as a viable employment alternative for individuals. In addition to the private sector, the first sector, and the government, the second sector, this would provide a meaningful occupation to millions, and would he see reconnect them with the American tradition of volunteerism and philanthropy, although one more question whether it is true volunteerism in this case, and if they are receiving financial compensation in any form. He ends by underscoring the point that we are at the crossroads and that our safe transition to another era will depend on our foresight and determination. We are entering in a new age of global markets and automated production. The road to near workerless economy is within sight. Whether that road leads to a safe haven or a terrible abyss will depends on how well civilization prepared for the post-market era that will follow on the heels of the third industrial revolution. The end of work could spell a death sentence for civilization as we have come to know it. The end of work could also signal the beginning of a great social transformation, a rebirth of the human spirit. The future lies in our hands. In other words, these globalists are saying that because they might be in a minority in 2050, that they basically cannot expect to influence certain types of individuals in society. And also, with the growing numbers of people not having jobs, you're not going to be able to pay for a lot of the things in the system, Social Security, Medicare, even welfare, whatever, that you used to pay into the system. And as there's a decline, there's going to be a different type of situation where people basically may go crazy if they're not going to be having any kind of food or clothing and things that they basically need in order to maintain and take care of their families. So what they're saying is that the future looks daunting, especially these white folks are saying that as well. When we come back on the Laurie Henderson podcast show, we'll talk about the banking industry, and we're going to do our music break, and we're talking about companies and banks and all of these businesses closing down, and even in the technology sector and other parts, because a lot of these companies are going out of business. They're not hiring, and people are being laid off from work, and they're becoming depressed, and people are asking the question as to what do they do now? It is almost getting worse like that of the Great Depression back in the 1920s and 30s where we basically had the Great Depression at that time. And people are saying that that is what it's feeling like. And damn, there's people who's saying, I'm going to take my own life and all this old stuff. We'll be right back on the Laurie Henderson podcast show with our continuing conversation, the crisis of the American economy and the decline of the economic, political, and system in this country. The Lawyers and Podcast show is back on from our music break. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about the crisis of the American workforce and how globalization is no longer working for the American worker. That they're going to be just rich and poor in our society. Thumbs up, like, share, and subscribe. We basically, before the music break, we have announced, of course, that the companies, there has been companies that has announced hiring freeze. I was reading, and they have announced these hiring freezes, and they are continuing to lay off workers, right? And Professor Jeremy Ryken warned us about the end of work in his famous book in 1995, The End of Work. And basically, we're starting to see a global shift change that major corporations are finding ways to get rid of the high price earner in their corporations. They're basically being very, very, very particular now as to who they hire on certain types of jobs in certain types of sectors. And now there is a lot of decline in the American workforce. And to top it up and to top it all off, they have the challenge with the BRIC nations, and they also have problems with a lot of major corporations and banks and other types of companies that are getting and shutting down their physical office spaces and businesses. And this is becoming what Jeremy Ryken described as the end of work, that the society will be replaced by robots. The humans will no longer be expected to work in certain types of industries anymore. They don't need to pay a lot of people in certain types of manufacturing jobs. They don't need banking industries because a lot of people surveyed that they most likely do their banking online. So the banks are closing down as well. And let's talk about certain types of banks that have just recently closed down because, we're not even talking about the ones in Silicon Valley that closed down recently. We're not talking about all of them. We're also talking about these major banks as well, and that these companies are laying off people left and right. Okay. Now, this was by the dailymail.com on September the 9th of 2024. And the title reads, Bank have closed 539 branches in just 6 months, with Wells Fargo, Chase among those shutting the most. Banks closing 539 local branches across the country in the first half of the year, leaving more and more Americans without access to basic financial services. If the rate continues for the rest of 2024, it would mean more than 1,000 branches wiped from malls in towns and city centers. Bank of America closed the most branches, a total of 90 in just 6 months. Okay, so they're now seeing the second largest bank have closed a lot of their branches there. U.S. Bank also made substantial closures, shutting 73 of their locations in the same period. Wells Fargo shut 62, Chase 53, and TD Bank 52. The closures, which banks must report a federal regulator, represent a trend as major banks move away from expensive brick and mortar branches in favor of online services. You see, the majority of Americans from Gen Z to Boomers are in less need of a traditional bank, which may explain the rising number of physical branches that have been closing over the past years. Andrew Murray, lead data research at Gold Banking Rates, told DailyMail.com, found that even retirees prefer online banking to in-branch services. Overall, 78% of Americans prefer using mobile and online banking, and almost 1 in 4 did not visit their bank in the past year. Our survey of more than 1,000 adults clearly showed that the demand for banking is low across all generations, even boomers 65 and older. Okay, so they recognizing now that they have to close these banks, and they give like at least the top banks that had closed within this year. And the branches, Bank of America closing the highest at 90 branches. U.S. Bank, it closed 73 branches. Wells Fargo closed down 62. Chase closed down 53. TD Bank closed down 52. Woodforce closed down 31 branches. PNC closed down 37. Citizen Bank closed down 29. Key Bank closed down 16. Capital One closed down 12. And Citibank closed down 5. Okay, so they're recognizing that the layoffs are all across the board. Okay, and now we go to other types of companies that's laying off. See, here's the thing. When you have almost 326 million people in the United States, right? You're going to still need workers. You know, everybody cannot be an entrepreneur, even though you have to create jobs here. And so now, because of the economic system and because of the policies that this country is giving billions and billions of dollars over to Ukraine and Israel and other places to fight wars, and basically they're reducing the taxes and basically taking more of our tax money to finance these wars. Now people do not have money. They don't have money to spend. And people are all online, TikTok and IG, Instagram or whatever, and they're talking about this. Okay? Single moms are struggling, you know what I'm saying? And here's the issue here. These companies are continuing to shed more jobs. Let's take a look at it. The leading companies that announced layoff in 2024, Citi was the largest with 20,000 people laying people off. UPS laid off 12,000 people. Sam Club laid off 11,000 people, right? Tesla laid off 11,000 people. Bell Media laid off 4,800 people. Siemens Energy laid off 4,100 people. Is that Deutsche Bank, 3,500 people? John Lewis, what's that called? I can't see that word, but 3,500. And Telefónica laid off 3,421 people. We looked at these other numbers. It was very, very incredible. General Motors laid off just this year in September 1,695 people, right? And so there's other companies that are laying off people and basically are shutting their doors. Ford had announced even in February of 2024 that the number of their workforce that they laid off was 2,700. UPS laid off 12,000 people in February of 2024. American Airlines laid off 656 people. You see, Macy's laid off 2,000. Wayfair laid off 1,650. So do we have a lot of people? A lot of companies that are laying off folks, and it's a growing list of people. Google announced that they have laid off 1,000 people in January. They basically said they had to reduce their workforce, and it's like it's becoming crazy out here. Microsoft laid off 1,500 people in June of 2024. Continental AG laid off 7,150 people, 150 workers. Nike had laid off 1,600 people. So you can see how all of these corporations, the major corporations, are shedding jobs. They're not creating jobs, they're shedding jobs. Okay, Indeed, which was lying about a lot of workers, a lot of companies that were hiring. Indeed was going around allowing people to basically make, posting that they were hiring, and they got in trouble as well. But since then, Indeed themselves have laid off 1,000 people. Okay. Citigroup, of course, had laid off an additional 4,500 people in contrast of the 20,000 people that they have laid off. But they began that in May because they've already was working to lay off a lot of people. So Citigroup has been the one that hit hard. Their people, them and Tesla, has been hit hard with a layoff among its workers. Southwest Airlines laid off 2,000. Nike came back and said that they had to lay off additional 740 more people. Apple had to come back and say they laid off 600 people, right? So you get an increase of these people laying off their workers. The school system of Harvard laid off 400 people. Dell Technologies, 6,000. All of these folks all these companies are laying off people. UPS laid off 540 people in July of this year. Okay. American Electric Power laid off 1,500. So the growing numbers of people being laid off is increasing. And if Kamala Harris wins, I just had bad news that I had to report. Speaking of Kamala Harris, I went back. Remember, I told you that Kamala Harris was not a part of the Council on Foreign Relations or the Bilderberg family. And I went back there and I saw her name on the list of being a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. I was like, damn. Now she's able and eligible to be the president of the United States now, because she's now a part of the Council on Foreign Relations, as the same with Joe Biden and Obama and Bush. And Donald Trump, of course, is from a member of the Bilderberg family. So I went back and I saw her name. And I told y'all in the last video that I was going to do that. And I saw her name. I was like, shoot, she's able to be president now. Okay. So you have a global and economic turnaround. But anyway, Intel announced they laid off 15,000 people. Paramount Global had laid off 2,000. Verizon Communications laid off 4,800 people, right? And the list keep going on and on and on and on. IBM laid off 1,000 people, right? Scale AI laid off 1,000 people. Tata Steel laid off 2,800 people in August of 2024. There are major corporations laying off people. Now, some people are saying, well, we're going to just go ahead and do our own thing. We have people who quit their jobs, their $100,000 job, $150,000 job or whatever, and say, "Well, I want to do my own things." And you can do that, but right now it's in a bad economy. Okay, businesses are struggling. So now these corporations is not willing to hire you as they used to have tried to hire you. So what would be the changes of who would basically depends on who would win the next election that's coming up. Will we have Kamala Harris, which will continue the ideal of globalization, and so that the American worker would look more pessimistic in their future? Or will you hire Donald Trump, who is a nationalist, who is going to focus more on the American worker and is going to basically bring those jobs back to the United States? We don't know. That's the reason why we, of course, specifically as Black people, cannot rely upon jobs. I was arguing with a white man the other day, and he was saying, "Well, you Black folks are always wanting to try handouts and want reparations or whatever." And I had to remind him that white people get handouts from the government all the time. What do you think when you get these, when you go and get these earmarks and you get all kinds of loans on your signatures with these banks, and that the policies that's passed is based upon helping white men. So y'all get handouts every day for the government. And remember, if you basically listen to my last article, remember I told you about John Kerry, Senator John Kerry, who's married to the highest woman. Remember I told you that John Kerry knew about the companies that basically was going to be the companies that was going, you had to pay your premiums to, when Obama passed Obamacare in 2008. John Kerry and his wife purchased, that was a book that said that he and his wife purchased millions of dollars of shares in the companies where the people who go to these pharmaceutical companies to pay for their medicine had to pay their premiums to. John Kerry basically knew about that, and he went and purchased stock. You know what I'm saying? Like I said, the average American person, specifically Black people, would have went to jail for doing that, because that's what it's called: inside information, inside trading, and things of that nature. And so we have it where white people are able to know and have information. They're able to get inside information and knowledge. They also are able to basically go on to these senators, get relationship with these politicians, and these politicians help them to produce bills that's going to get them relationships with corporations, business, and stuff. So that's why you see a lot of them starting these tech companies up. They're starting these hedge funds and stuff like that. And they're able to get money on their signatures, like I said earlier, from these banks. And this is how white people are able to stay ahead of everybody, because the politicians cheat for them, and that they have insider information in order to keep their economic system over ours. And basically, in addition to that, they also is refusing to pay us our reparations. Okay, you got to also understand that. That's the reason why I tell Black people all the time, you can't mimic white folks because they have not given you reparations. Okay, so that's the reason why you all stand in these high price apartments and condos, and what I'm saying, you only got broccoli in your refrigerator. Or you basically looking out, making sure that the repo man don't come and get your car, because you don't have the same economic system. Okay. Now, mind you, yeah, there's us who's trying to basically build up our economic relationships, starting jobs and things of that nature. And that's what we have to do. There got to be more people creating jobs and increasing productivity in the workforce. The white man is hiring against himself. He's either hiring against his women. he no longer even want to hire his own children. You must recognize now that we are entering in a different political, social, and economic system where the rich is going to get more richer and the poor is going to become more poor. It is wishful thinking to believe that everyone can be a content creator or an IG model or a TikTok influencer. It is not job security because that is a lot can go wrong. You can lose an audience, the platform can cut you off, or they will pay you less, claiming that there's a decline in viewership or audiences, right? This wishful thinking that took place, of course, back in the late 80s and 90s, especially in the 90s and the year 2000, where we had young black men thinking that everybody can be the next Michael Jordan or the next big hip hop artist or R&B singer. All that stuff had to fade away. Now we got black people thinking the same way that the white youth are thinking, that everybody can be a TikTok influencer and everybody can go on Instagram and make money, or they can get an OnlyFans page. These things are not basically, it does not work long term. And Kevin Samuels told us this, about, all of this OnlyFans stuff. He said that when that OnlyFans ends for a lot of these 304s out there, Subway will be hiring. Okay. And so we're in a different economic decline here. We're in a different situation. And that's the reason why, like I said, the Kamala Harris win, we're going to continue to get the same thing with Joe Biden and Obama. And that is to make sure that they ignore black people for another 4 years. They're going to continue this, okay? And that's the reason why we either had to set it out or vote for Donald Trump. And they have been inundating me and other people with all of these text messages, sending us out all these brochures and voting, talking about go out and vote, get your vote. Hey, man, go on out there and vote, knocking on your door, get your vote, get your vote. Listen, in a real democracy, okay, you wouldn't have to force your citizens to vote if you were really doing something for them economically. A politician will have no trouble with citizens in voting if they basically had done something for their citizens or their constituency. You wouldn't need that. But because we have a racist society and because we have black politicians who can't do a damn thing for black folks in this country, they have to now pressure you to vote. They have to basically get these black celebrities to go out there and shame you in voting. They have to get Obama to wave his finger. You black men, you basically are not coming out here at the same time I was running, okay? Well, you basically tricked black people, okay? And we're not fit to fall for that trick no more. You said we're not going to, as Tariq Nasheed pointed out, we're not going to fall for the old banana in the tailpipe scheme anymore. Okay, you have to tell us what you're going to do for us. This old benign and neglect policy, that worked on the old civil rights generation. Okay, not on us. Okay, our economic potential basically depends on it. Okay, and that's exactly what we're pushing for. This new economic and a new economic relationship that works for black people as well. The American worker is also upset with these illegal immigrants, and I can't blame them as well. But they basically, if white folks will listen to us and give us our reparations, then the Democrats would have been long time stopped about bringing these illegal immigrants over. They would have been able to basically say, hey, black folks, help us to make sure that these globalists don't bring these illegal immigrants over here to take our jobs. But because white folks were so racist and because they turned their back on black people, they are now getting the same kind of, the same type of problems and issues that black people have been talking about for years. They're basically kicking these white kids out of work and white people out of work. And the globalist is going and taking over. And we as black people told them, we told these good white folks, we say, listen, you got to give the American black person reparations. Okay, we can sustain a better economic situation than these people, these illegal immigrants, and these people coming all across these 150 countries. You got to help us here. And these white folks turn their chin up and say, "We're not giving you niggers a damn thing." And they start talking about, "Now get off my lawn, nigger, and go home." See, had they been listening to what black people have been saying, then we would not be able to basically depend on having to fight a globalist society and change in the economic and political structure of this country had they listened to what black people have been saying. We told white folks, hey, give us our reparations, set up a good economic strong situation for black Americans and not put us in a segmented labor market. But they didn't want to listen to us. And now they're on line saying the same thing that we're saying, as I said earlier. You've been listening to the Lawyers and Podcast Show. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.